This is Dave Monk, Prairie Monk, WAOT, Champaign,
And Dave on the board. We should also mention today is Sunday, November the 13th, 2016.
This is Kirby and
Sheila Rayla.
We've just been talking about rails, and we have a railroad museum, and we hope to get railroad historic trains into Champaign. So we've been dealing with Gandhi dancers. Gandhi dancers are civil engineering students that are operating like people who put in railroads in the past. And we have 4 miles of railroad that we hope to put into rail. It has an adjacent interurban that is retired, and that would be for trail.
Well,
And
I'm
both would be a part of trying to get trains into Champaign. So I'll remember you by Rayla. So we're changing directions this morning. I was going to say something about the Trump era, but I think what I happened to me this week was Liz has been after me for a long time to do something with the master naturalists. We have a lot of sites out there in the hinterland that are sites that need action, whether it's to pick seed or to do other things like as menial as picking up garbage, or to remove invasive trees, or look at the future of a prairie that's down to 0.01% of the state's prairie. That's all that's saved. It's a very, very small amount. And this is our genetic material. So Liz has suggested that we put some of these sorts of sites that we have into the Master Naturalist program. And that means that the Master Naturalists have a need for this sort of experience, but there's a range of these places, and the intent is quite considerable. We're talking about interns, and actually David, who is engineering, is more or less an intern in a way, because he's doing database with me, and he's also putting this program on public television with Banner Public Television, and then up on YouTube. So this is available to anyone at any time, anywhere. And so I want to know more about the Master Naturalist program. Have you been through?
No.
Okay. So Liz, tell us a little bit about it, and now you know why I have run into someone who is doing the program at this moment, lives in Winfield Village, and may like to be a steward on Lake Park Prairie.
Well, I got involved. I got involved in the Master Naturalist program. I went through it 2 years ago. I completed my. I guess first you become a trainee, and then you're an intern, and then you're a master naturalist. I first became interested in the program and heard about it after doing the Boneyard Creek cleanup. Almost a decade ago, I suppose it was. I was in there on Boneyard Creek Day, pulling out. They pulled out trash. They pulled out trash that had been in there. We found an old soup ladle, for instance, that must have been from the pioneer days. And it just fascinated me. I became very interested in the state's waterways. And exploring that is when I learned about the Master Naturalist. So when I retired, I started the program. and learned about stewardship, and I've been doing stewardship ever since.
Yes, and you've been doing stewardship with a lot of different bodies. List some of them, because they're very various and many, so it gives you an idea of what a steward would be expected to do as part of the internship. That's part of the curriculum, is to get experience in perhaps a number of different places rather than in one place.
Right. The Master Naturalist program offers stewardships with all kinds of bodies. The parks, both city park districts, the Forest Preserve District. There are opportunities with the Natural History Survey, for instance, doing the bug collections. The list goes on and on. Your organization, I know, has a lot of stewardship opportunities, too.
The one problem that we have is, and Grand Prairie Friends has it too, and other bodies have it too, is that stewards can be volunteers, but they need to know enough to be independent and to be leaders and to take in other people. We're lacking that leadership that makes it possible. If you have 50 volunteer students and they have never been on a prairie before, you have to be able to teach and lead and have a bunch of volunteers who go out there and say, this is purple coneflower, you pick it this way, and this is liatris, and you pick it this way, and this is purple clover, and you pick it this way. And they have to be able to recognize what it is in a time when it's not flowering anymore. How do we... That's part of our reluctance to have a lot of volunteers out there in the boondocks, because we don't have the time or the capacity or the money to supervise. So say something about that, because it's a real leadership problem. The result of it is, in Grand Prairie Friends, for instance, is to not have interns, but to employ someone who has a degree in biology or whatever it is where they need it.
I currently steward at 3 different sites primarily. I started at the Champaign County Forest Preserve at the Sangamon River site. And I started as a trail steward, but my trail was small. And I'd walk around the trail and I'd see all this honeysuckle. And so I asked, well, can I cut it down? And they said yes. And my original ideal there was to get my herbicide license eventually and do it in the traditional methods that are currently being practiced. Someplace along the line, I started saying, wait a minute, if we really had enough people jumping in and helping on this, we could do it without using chemicals. So one thing that I've been excited about is the idea of, let's get on top of this game. Let's bring in volunteers. Let's give them a sense of pride and ownership in individual sites. And that's why I brought Sheila today for one reason, because she was one of the very first people to come out and help me. When I went from Sangamon River to Heritage Park for the Champaign Park District was my second stewardship site. Sheila has been out there twice helping me there, or maybe more.
Yeah, a few times.
A few times. And now we have a new opportunity starting with the Urbana Park District. On Tuesday, we're going to have a major initiative starting to remove the honeysuckle that's growing along the saline, the banks of the saline. Yes. They call it a drainage ditch, but I don't call it a drainage ditch. I think we have to give our waterways due respect.
But you've also been working with Weaver Park, which is in Urbana Park District.
You know, I do that on our regular scheduled work days, but maybe Sheila can talk a little bit about her experience just as a volunteer.
I think so.
Yeah, I think I can address some of the concerns that you had. When you have someone like Elizabeth overseeing what you do, I mean, I came into this knowing nothing about which plants were desirable and which ones weren't. You know, should I cut this down? Should I leave this? Elizabeth has supervised us and then turned us loose, take down the ragweed or whatever, and taught us how to identify it. I grew up out in the country, and I kind of have a passion for
Whereabouts in the country?
the suburbs of Besodom.
Okay.
Yeah, and my parents still live out there, and I visit frequently. And I've seen, over the years, a decline in the diversity of the wildlife, the things I used to see when I was growing up in that area. So it's been a concern, but I had no area of expertise. I'm a nurse by trade. So going out with Elizabeth, I learned, hands-on about what plants are the desirable ones and which ones aren't. Having that close supervision was real helpful, and it was inspiring to look down a patch that she'd cleared and see you really can make progress this way if people work together.
Oh, yes. Besodom is interesting to us because the rest stop there had to be enlarged due to sewer requirements. And we had a 30-year-old prairie that was part planted prairie, but it part took remnant prairie from Airport Road in Champaign. And it was transferred there, and it's growing well, and that whole prairie was demolished to put in sewer races. So we spent months down there trying to convince them to buy adjacent farmland. And the farmers were willing, but probably at a price that the state was not willing to pay. So, yes, we know about Besodom. And
yeah, you actually visited my parents years ago. There must have been some prairie out around the area they live. But, because they're in the middle of cornfields and bean fields, there is a lot of herbicide that's used in those areas. And so it has, cut down the diversity. And also, well-meaning people like my parents plant things. My mother had goats, so she planted crown vetch, and it's now taken over a patch along the road. And, none of us knew that this was not a good thing.
crown vetch has one root. And it is very cosmetic. It can cover up erosion and look wonderful because it has these interesting purple flowers.
Yeah, and goats like it.
And the erosion goes on underneath. So it is banned from most reclamation sites that involve prairie. So
Right, that's one of the things Elizabeth and I took out
Uh-huh.
when we were on one of our... Like, oh, Mom planted this.
Elizabeth, tell us what your background is. Are you a sociology person, or you?
I like to describe my life as a downward career progression, because I went from financial planning into social work into blue collar work, and now, of course, in my retirement, I'm working with ecological issues. So maybe I've come full circle to what I really consider as the top.
So give us a little bit more background of the Master Naturalist program, and what was exciting about it for you, and how your first internships were contributing to that.
The Master Naturalist program was much more exciting than I ever would have dreamed possible. I mean, it just opened up whole worlds of vistas of knowledge that I didn't know. I had never really given serious thought to. The program is very well designed, wonderful educational materials prepared. They bring in top scholars, often Professor Emeriti, from various fields, who give the most informative, engaging, and heartfelt presentations. It was wonderful. I did my first volunteer work with John Marlin up at the his prairie restoration at Florida and Orchard.
Near the president's house, in
Right.
front of the old pomology buildings.
So he gave an opportunity for volunteering, and he showed me what to do. And I think the only weed I learned that day was Japanese knotweed, but he told me I could come back and pull it any time. And that's what I did. And someplace just being there with the trees, and I mean, not the trees in the prairie, but the native plants, the echinacea, it was a wonderful experience. And all I can think of now is the invasive species that I was pulling. But it was really a wonderful experience.
The invasive species come to fore. You happened to be out of town when the North American Prairie Conference was on. But one of the things Sheila was talking about was ragweed. And John Taft was talking about prairies that are very small. And if you keep mowing them in, you lose that edge, and that edge grows plants that like disturbance and like to be mown. And so you keep reducing the size of the prairie. So if we mow a small remnant of prairie, you have to do it very carefully. So you don't remove the prairie plants that are on the edge. And so that's one of my concerns at Lake Park, is to keep the trail, which they're generously provided, to 4 feet or 5 feet, the width of mower, one strip. Like if we mow from Whiteheath to Seymour, one strip with a tractor. Tractors don't like to go in one direction. They like to go and then come back. But we would prefer that they do it once and not take out 6 inches on one side and 6 inches on another side, and keep doing that. So,
one of the biggest problems with the mowing is that tires, whether it's tractor tires or bike tires, or can become a real factor in spreading the seed from invasive species. So if you mow in an area that's inadvertently infested with seeds that you don't want, the mowing is going to create a much larger problem than you had to begin with.
One of the things that you did, and I don't know whether you've done that, Sheila, is to give a volunteer or an intern a specific patch. And you had a specific patch at the Forest Preserve Sangamon River Prairie, which is about 160 acres or something like that.
I don't do the whole 160 acres.
That's right. So you were assigned a patch, and other volunteers were assigned other patches. So have you done that sort of thing?
When Elizabeth and I worked together, there were usually a group of us working a smaller area, a smaller patch together, because a lot of us don't have the knowledge of plants. She was right there to supervise and make sure that we knew what we were doing. And if I had a question, should I pull this? She was right there to ask. So we worked relatively small areas, but it was surprising to see, coming to different work parties, how much progress had been made just by people doing it by hand. We tend to want to do things quickly, mow or spray, but the getting down and working with the hands, it's rewarding if you're doing it.
It's also very friendly. You get to interact with each other and learn about your families, and that sort of interaction is helpful. We don't have a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I met some great people at her work parties. We had a good time.
Did you go to a stewardship dinner?
No.
Once a year they usually have a stewardship dinner. I don't know whether it happened this year. I think it did. But stewards are brought together and they have to explain what they are doing and why.
Actually, the Master Naturalists this year had their 10-year anniversary party at I think it's called the White Oaks Barn in Vermilion County.
Okay.
And we could have brought a guest in. I did want to bring Sheila, but she goes to visit her parents in Pasodum every Sunday evening, and that's when they had it just a few weeks ago. Uh-huh. But, when you talked about stewardship and work parties and having it be friendly, one of my goals or dreams or aims is to have the land stewarded by what, I'm not sure whose term this was, a land community.
Yes, the public, if it's knowledgeable, gets to know that this is their site. Usually, if it's a forest preserve site, it's in effect public domain, and they get to own it in a way. And so that's what you're talking about, I think.
Well, I think it's a community of people that care for the land, have a commitment to the land, but it's a way to give back to the community. I mean, we pay our taxes, but other than that, oftentimes we don't make a difference. Oftentimes our voices aren't heard. And I think that getting involved in natural area stewardship is one way to give back to the land, to the community. I was leaving Sangamon River Forest Preserve just a few weeks ago, and this woman I had never seen before saw me putting my tools away in the car, and she came up to me and started hugging me and thanking me for the beauty, and I didn't create the beauty, I just took away the invasive plants. But she said, thank you so much. She told me she was going through a divorce and that she came there to Sangamon River 3 or 4 times a week, and this was saving her life.
To retreat.
Actually to jog and to walk and to just be a part of the beauty.
A lot of our people that are community people enjoy the prairie generally, the overall prairie, and they like to walk in it, but they don't know the details of the hyacinths that's there, or they may want to pick the hyacinths and put it in a vase. But Sheila, let me ask you about your relatives. This gene pool, this genetic base, is down to 0.01%, and that 2/3 of this land in Illinois was prairie, and that's almost criminal. So if you want a soybean that is perennial, so you don't have to plant it each year, you mow it for 20 years, then you reduce the erosion that's going down the Mississippi and causing a dead zone in the Gulf. How do you relate to your relatives that are into farmland and sometimes into invading our last bastions of prairie that are like on the railroad lines?
My parents aren't farmers. They were hobby farmers, and actually the corn and the soybeans that they were surrounded with were in some ways the bane of their existence. My mom tried to plant cherry trees along the border of their property, and the drift from the fields killed them. It killed most things that were on the border. Actually, a lot of their land is kind of grown up wild, but again, they don't have the knowledge, and they're too old. They would need someone to work it, but they don't have the knowledge to know, like with the crown vetch, this is not a good plant. This is an invasive plant. But yeah, a lot of the area around their place is kind of grown up wild because they were too old to work it, and they also kind of like the wild wooded kind of.
Yes, but very few people. It's like 6 generations since we started to get rid of the prairie, so it's all weeds, warts, hearses, and whatnot. So, and it's hard to recognize it as other than weeds. So, how do you get from that stage to some education about the invasive purple vetch or other plants?
How would I talk to them about it? I think for them to see that it actually benefits them would be motivating. That there are other ways. Okay, you want the vetch, because the goats can eat it, and you're afraid of this area eroding. The vetch is not the answer to that, but there maybe this other plant is.
We do have soil and water conservation people and Farm Bureau people who are heavily involved in things like the Barnhart Prairie and its preservation. And so I think there's hope there, but there's also, we're just losing a trail in the Paris to Decatur area. It's an old Penn Central line, and it has a gob of prairie on it. And very shortly, that will go back to the farmers for 1 more acre of corn and soybeans. And
Yeah, I think there are a couple of problems when I think of my parents and the people that live around them. One is, I mean, you're talking about the Farm Bureau and things they have access to. I don't think there's a lot of awareness that they have access to people that will come and help them to understand the land that they're living on. I don't think there's a lot of awareness of that. And again, they have to be motivated. When you're talking about, economics, how much money can I make from this patch of land? For myself, being out there and working with Elizabeth put me back in touch. I mean, I moved in town, and, I haven't been out where there was prairie, immersed in it in a long time. I think to maybe get people out there and let them, see it, be there, touch it, see the value in it.
some of it depends on original soil. And the only original soil we have left is on those railroad beds where people didn't invade.
David, I want to jump in here a minute. You had asked about, one place that you and I disagree is your interest is almost primarily focused on railroads, or I'm not on railroads, on prairie, which are primarily the ones that are left is around railroads. I'm equally interested, or perhaps even more interested, in woodland and savanna environments. I see the prairies as extremely important ecosystems, but I see them as being very dependent, all our natural areas, as being very dependent upon mankind and mankind's involvement now to keep them healthy and to preserve them. I think that in summer and in winter, prairies are harsh and unyielding environments. And people need trees, David, in ways that I know are not optimal for maximum prairie. But if we're going to have people involved in protecting and creating the ecosystems of the future, we need to start think what's realistic and what's best for the earth, mankind, the animals, the plants.
You can hug a tree, but you can't hug a prairie. You'll get chiggers and spiders and small snakes, and the forest is minimal, but it has been preserved because it's mostly around rivers and on moraines where the roots were drained enough. So there's not that 0.01% that's left of the forest. There's a lot more of forest. It's sometimes depreciated because it has been invaded by crud trees that don't belong, and so I appreciate the forestry part of things. The forest preserve is designed to preserve forest, but I am very worried about the prairie section of the prairie forest ecosystem. We have a little prairie across the road which has a forest as well as a prairie, and it turns people on when they realize that this is not just a little trail through a vacant lot. And I appreciate what you're saying about the trees. So on our trails we try to leave a tree or two here and there. But
David, I want to stress that I think that's so important. And the reason I think it's important is if you have a tree to go under for shade, you can work in the prairie all day in summer. If you can come back and get a drink of water and get out of the sun and get out of the heat. But if you don't have that relief, prairies are harsh and unyielding.
yes, and they are. And people will ask, well, how do you know what you're putting into this constructed prairie? Well, you go back to remnants. But the remnants of prairie didn't have any trees. That's why we have a compass plant, because people could go 100 miles and they'd be back on their doorstep because their brains tell them to do that, and so they would have to get on their horse's saddle and look for a compass plant so that they know where to go. There were no trees that you could say, this tree is to the north or this tree is to the south or this building. It was prairie because prairie can handle wet feet and trees cannot, except something like a cottonwood, and that's usually on a drainage ditch.
Well, actually, David, the reason I brought up the forest environments, we're talking about landowners, and I went to a conference in Indiana last December, and there was a professor who had done research. She was a sociologist, and she had done research among all the forest owners in Indiana to find out why how long they'd had the forest, why they had the forest, you know, what their awareness of invasive species were, what would convince them to do something about them. And when you had talked a little bit to Sheila about those issues and her parents, and I was really surprised to see most of the landowners, the forest owners in Indiana, were old people. You know, they weren't young. They'd had their forests a long, long time of their land, but they were interested in preserving it for the worth of the land itself, because they cared about the land, they cared about the wildlife. They wanted to leave this land to their children. And that was their motives. And they had a vague awareness of invasive species. But it was like dawning gradually. It was something that people were aware of but didn't talk to each other about. But two of the things that they said that would influence them in their decision to do something about it was a child talking about it to them, a family member, or their farmer, or, you know, neighbors, you know, if their neighbors were involved. But anyway, that was how I got off. I'm not trying to
That's quite okay. We have a trail, the Kickapoo Trail, going from Havana to St. Joe at the moment. And it took out a lot of trees. And universally, the public was very much complaining because they appreciate the trees, and to lose the trees for a trail.
This might be a really good time to jump in and really mention to folks where it's about 5:30 now. You're tuned to WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM. This is the Prairie Monk every Sunday morning between 11 and noon. You get to hear things about the environment, and you've walked right into a debate here where Dave is going to defend the need to turn things back into a pure prairie, nothing but prairie, because that's, after all, what most of this was back before the Europeans came stomping through here. In the olden days, the only thing that came stomping through would have been buffalo or something like that, as opposed to Elizabeth, who's saying, well, you're not going to have prairie sustained without people's help. People aren't going to put up with nothing but prairie as far as the eye can see, because they'll pass out from heat prostration if you do that. So let's give them a few trees here and there. And besides which, people do like to look at trees. When many people just look at prairie plants, it looks like weeds to them. So the tree, at least as Dave has even pointed out, is something that you can hug. You're not really going to hug a New England, a New Jersey tea plant.
So the Lake Park where I met someone who is in the Master Naturalist program and might use the Lake Park 2.5 acres as for an internship. The 74 houses in that subdivision have a U around them that is 2/3 forest and 1/3 prairie. So part is a sort of privacy thing, because this is a private natural area, and it's adjacent to Prairie Fields, which is a slightly different income bracket, and it's also adjacent to Winfield Village, which is a federal housing settlement, which is quite a different thing. And the prairie gets to be used a lot by the surrounding apartments, and Lake Park is very generous in allowing other people to use this park. But if we do something like, if you have at the end of the park a sanitary treatment plant which was too small, but it's been buried or eliminated, and it now is a lawn, and I'm thinking that could be a kiosk with some information about the prairie. Have you been involved at all, both of you, with interpreting the prairie? Do you take photographs? Do you go to? So obviously, you go to meetings about these sort of natural areas. What do you see in the future of your life? Are you going to transmit the pod that's on a little plant of baptisia to someone else? Are you going to look at the insect? How do you see yourself developing as a naturalist?
Well, David, I woke up this morning that I was going to go out and work in the, I was going to drive up to Sangamon River and do some work there and then go over to the Perkins Road site to do some prep for our work day on Tuesday. And I got your email. And your email said, please come here and talk about stewardship. And so I still haven't gotten out to my prairies yet. So there's always that balance. You know, how much time do you spend doing the hands-on work? How much time do you spend communicating, networking, educating, emailing? And Sheila, you have a full-time job and
Right.
2 adult children that are leaving the nest
And 2 aging parents. So yeah, it is about balance. I think like where you've caught us is in the beginning. You know, Elizabeth started with, this was her brainchild, this was her baby, there was no one else involved. Now she has dozens of volunteers. That in and of itself is spreading awareness. Myself, it got me back in touch. And right now I can't say that I'm actively spreading the news, but I'm thinking about it. My job, in my day job, I work with low-income people, and I'm intrigued with the idea of somehow, getting some of my clients involved in this project, giving them the kind of experience that I've had to get back in touch and to feel an ownership,
Wow, I have a question for you, which is a little off the topic, but as we have a trail that comes from, in the future will come from Danville to Champaign, we have to go through to make the trail continue through to Whiteheath and Monticello and Allerton Park and Decatur. But it goes through a low-income area. And in Indianapolis, that happened, and cameras placed along the trail showed that most of that trail through the low-income area was used by fairly affluent people who had $500 to have a good bicycle and all the clothing and equipment that goes with it. As a nurse, I've been to a place in southern Illinois where there was a hospital, and the trail had on it marks for people who were in various degrees of heart attack to do a walk or so the hospitals that we have to go past, Carl Clinic and Provena, are the sort of people who could indirectly use this corridor.
Yes.
And they could use a little bit of prairie here and there, even if it's only 2 sticks. And how do you get across Lincoln Avenue? So as a nurse, we're interested in how you work with the prairie and bring it. You probably can't bring an armload of big bluestem into the hospital, but you can probably take people out into Crystal Lake Park or other places that have nature, and Crystal Lake has mainly got trees, and Busey Woods is mainly trees. But I just happen to be a prairie nut because I came from Australia and couldn't find the ecosystem, and I got involved. But I'm equally interested in how you use the
Well, I'm not a hospital nurse. I function more as a social worker. I do home visiting and health education. So I function more in that capacity. But I agree with you. Again, it comes down to the issue, the same issue you brought up with us, or that came up when you asked us, what are we doing? People have a hard time balancing their lives. When you've got people, which is the population I work with, who have small children, they're probably working a low-paying job, they come home exhausted, you have child care issues. Engaging those people is a challenge. It's not that they're not interested, but their lives are demanding.
They sometimes have
something
3
else
jobs to keep themselves afloat.
Exactly. So, connecting them with that area, it's a challenge. Just, the life, energy, time balance, helping these people to find it. Some of the areas that Elizabeth has worked are actually close to low-income areas, and the idea of somehow connecting those two intrigues me. I'm just not sure how to do it, how to reach those people, how to, motivate them to, give up some of their precious time and energy to go out there. Because I think once you're there, the reward is there, but you have to get there.
David, one idea that I've had for a long time, and I haven't, if I say nobody's bought it yet, I haven't tried to sell it yet. I haven't really developed it, except when I'm out there cutting honeysuckle, I have a lot of time to think. And one thing that I would love to see a park district or forest preserve district or some agency do, a city or a county, is actually develop a learning program for young people, for disadvantaged youth, where they actually got paid to cut the honeysuckle, to bag those teasel heads, to clean the garbage out of the slough, but not just inexpensive labor. Somebody that has an opportunity to learn.
Yes, I hate to see scouts picking up other people's garbage. I like them to realize why they're picking up, if they have to, but to try and keep them on the edge of doing something interesting with the landscape, with the trees and the prairie and whatever is there.
Actually picking up the garbage is one of the most important things that we do, because if you really read about what happens when trash or litter of any kind gets into our waterways, it's just tragic.
You've seen Pope Prairie in Rantoul.
Right.
And it would seem that the commercial people, contractors, are dumping on that road. We've had this sheriff go down there, and it stopped a little bit, but mattresses and things that are not the regular home development. It's something more than that. It destroys the nature of the prairie that's adjacent to it. And so I'm very sympathetic, and I think the students that come to help us feel that way too, and they will remove it. But the cost of removing it is tremendous. You have to have a front-end loader to lift a couch, and it has to go to a landfill, and somebody has to pay the cost of dumping it in the landfill. It's very, very, very difficult.
Well, David, that's why I get so excited about the ideas of land community, of groups of people who get together to care for a particular area. Because it's a set of hands, to do the work, but also a set of eyes. If somebody sees somebody dumping, if they know of a land community, they have someone to tell, they have someone to call. It's they have a reason to care.
They are the surveillance people in the long run. And so one of the things that people run into me and say they have enjoyed is picking seed. Have you picked seed?
No.
No? Oh,
no, but I would love to.
It's rewarding at this time of the year because the seeds are there. And you have to know which seeds to pick. I have had people pick ragweed seeds just because I wasn't there at the right time. But you pick ragweed seeds, you actually get rid of the ragweed before it seeds.
Right, at least they're not growing.
And so it doesn't get to be a body of seeds in the soil so that when the tractor that Elizabeth is talking about doesn't make a disturbance, and then it grows bigger and better. And some of the ragweeds are an inch across and 6 feet tall. So yeah.
I want to say Sheila was part of several groups that helped me this summer because we had an unbelievable ragweed crop all along the Copper Slough at Heritage Park. And they didn't think we would get it out of there, but by the time we were through, I had other naturalists say, please leave some ragweed for the wildlife.
Okay.
And it was hot, and trust me, we were grateful for the trees.
But Elizabeth has a pair of loppers that are not your $3 second-hand loppers from a garage sale. They're a heavy-duty loppers, and she can take down an inch-sized tree limb or and even more than that. Say something about the tools that you use.
Actually, my favorite tool, or the most useful tool in honeysuckle, has been the bow saw. When I felt like it's the difference, like when they did the repeating rifle on the frontier, because it just allowed us to work so much faster and so much easier. But I wanted to take a minute, so I'm going to change the subject here, because I do have ongoing opportunities for people to jump in and get involved. You don't have to be a master naturalist, but you can't work afternoons either, because I write, at the moment at least, I'm doing, I have volunteer stewardship on Monday afternoons at Heritage Park in Champaign. This Tuesday, we're starting, I'm working with Matt Balk at the Urbana Park District. They have taken a real leadership role in natural area redevelopment and reconstruction. And we are going to be working at the Perkins Road site along the banks of the Saline, taking out honeysuckle that has been there for decades.
Yes.
So we're very excited to be starting that. And on Wednesday afternoons from 2 to 4, we have work groups up at Sangamon River Forest Preserve, and we have an area there that we're working. And all three of these projects, with my involvement, are chemical-free. So we're doing it, some people might say the hard way. I say the way that's going to prove easiest in the long run, but is harder in the short term.
It's a wonderful way, but in state natural history survey circles, when you have 10,000 acres that you can work with in the Kankakee bottoms, it's very hard to do it by hand. You need big equipment, and you need, in that case, spot herbicide. So that's where we come into conflict some, because we don't blanket herbicide as the state does sometimes. We spot herbicide, this teasel or the tree that is invasive, mainly the autumn olive tree. And we and they have herbicide seminars and give licenses to people, just because after years and years and years of fighting these creatures that are invasive, they've just almost given up and used Roundup and Tolon to get rid of a tree that otherwise would not be taken out, because there just aren't enough volunteers to do the way you're doing.
Well, I have to admit, David, at 2 of my last work days, I've had volunteers who've been working with me the whole time say, we should spray that with Roundup. I don't agree, but I've been doing this 2 years, so maybe when I've been doing this 22 years, I might feel the same way. But for now, this is something that I'm experimenting with. I feel with some success. I think, there's a lot of people who they bring their dogs to the forest preserve and to the parks. That's
dogs enjoy it.
Dogs and children, and people enjoy foraging. That's part of our heritage. And to me, I don't do a lot of foraging, But I like the idea of being able to pick a berry and know that nothing was sprayed there. You know, that's important
Yes.
to me. You know, the little dogs running around, you know, in the parks. I think they can only be healthier if we can figure out ways to keep the chemicals off them.
Yeah, and Elizabeth started out very small, and it's a movement that has expanded. Still, this is very local. My feeling is that herbicide probably has its place because, as you noted, you can't pull everything in the state. You know, there just aren't enough people or enough manpower. But I think that it is possible. I'm seeing that it is possible to steward smaller areas, like local areas where you have a lot of people and a motivated population. It is possible. I'm seeing it.
It's amazing. One gentleman working in Mississippi started very small like this, with working with one Army Corps of Engineers property, and gradually it grew to a whole segment of the Mississippi all the way to Minnesota, and it had barges and bigger equipment that would pull dead cars and other things out of the water, and it was one man taking action, and you were having the same sort of success. I'm waiting for you to be on forest preserve boards and having your say more generally, you see. So that's cruel in a way because it takes you away. If you're a haberdasher and you're making hats and you suddenly become the president of the Haberdasher Union, you don't make hats anymore. That's a problem.
You know, David, one problem is we're all learning. You know, we all take the natural environment for granted. Now it's gone, and I mean, none of us have the answers. You know, we're all learning. We're all exploring different.
Yes, we don't know enough about prairie. There's not the money. That prairie plant is not going to generate a biochemical that is going to make you money. So unless we know about that, then there's money. But we don't know about our plant.
Which is a big deal when a lot of people are struggling financially. Money is a big deal, and what makes money and how people spend their time.
I must say that I once was at the Railroad Museum, and a volunteer there was on the back of a train, and she said down to me, I was standing on the ground, she said, I just finished the Master Gardener. And she said, I don't know diddly about prairie. And she, I think, probably it was sometime later that the Master Naturalist realized that we needed the Master Naturalist. And it's comprised of give us a little bit of the structure of the Master Naturalist. It has a base in ACEs, I think. And
3 minutes.
Oh.
3 minutes. We're almost done.
I want to say I recommend the Master Naturalist program so highly. If people are interested, they can learn more about it online. It's offered through the Cooperative Extension. We have an excellent local program. It just completed this year's classroom learning. It runs in the fall, usually from late August. This year it ended on November 1st with their graduation and potluck. But please look into it. It's a wonderful program. I highly recommend it.
It has help from the college, the ACES, the what used to be the College of Agriculture is supporting this.
You know, it's supported in part through the Cooperative Extension, I think, is the organization that runs it. We have local sponsors and local partners. The Forest Preserve District and the Urbana Park District are sponsors, but the Champaign Park District and many of the local organizations are partners and help out in many different ways, and hopefully it's reciprocated.
Well, thank you very much for coming. We're sorry that it's taken out some of your work time, but this is Elizabeth Kirby and Sheila Rail, and I thank you so much for coming in and giving a different approach to what we're talking about often.
I didn't mean to rush you people. She actually did have a full 3 minutes, and then we would have had the usual wrap-up time. Since we've actually paused here or stopped, Elizabeth, you mentioned that there are opportunities for people to come and help you, but of course they can't simply go out any old time and there you'll be. How are you willing to give out a phone number or an email address?
Give out a phone number. Okay. For any of the work days, you can contact me at, it's a new phone number, I hope I get it right, 714-9136. But also, if anyone's interested in the opportunities for this Tuesday's work day, it's going to be anytime you want to come between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m., you can contact Matt Balk at the Urbana Park District, because he's the leader in this project, and I'm delighted to be working with him.
And again, could you give Matt's last name? I didn't even catch that.
Matt Balk at the Urbana, B-A-L-K, at the Urbana Park District.
Okay, and again, I'll give your phone number again since you don't seem to mind. Area code 217, I presume, 714-9136. Dave, your audience probably knows yours by heart. I certainly have learned it, but you want to go ahead and tell people how they can get a hold of you if they want to come on in?
840-1911 or 351-1911.
And with that, we're down to just 2 minutes. That means we've actually got time to listen to our closing music. This is by Joel Mabus. This is from a dual CD. He released an album of him playing flat pick guitar and clawhammer banjo. So we're going to hear a little bit of the track that you always hear us talking over completely. And this is a combination of two songs, Old Mother Flanagan and Granny Will Your Dog Bite. Stay tuned. In less than 2 minutes, we will bring you Shruti, Music of India, again here on WEFT Champaign, 90.1 FM. And I must mention the views and opinions expressed here are solely those of the speakers and, of course, nobody else.